Some breaking news out of Chappaqua, where former First Lady Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, is approaching the cameras after that hours-long deposition by the House Oversight Committee in the Epstein investigation today. Here she comes. Let's listen in.
Well, I have just finished testifying. I answered every one of their questions as fully as I could, based on what I knew. And what I knew is what I said in my statement this morning. I never met Jeffrey Epstein, never had any connection or communication with him. I knew Ghislaine Maxwell casually as an acquaintance. But whatever they asked me, I did my very best to respond. It was disappointing that they refused to hold a public hearing, so I wouldn't have to be out here characterizing it for you. You could have seen it for yourself. We had asked for that. We think it would have been better for the committee and its efforts to gather whatever information they are seeking. We had a bit of a challenge in the beginning because we had agreed upon rules based on the fact it was going to be a closed hearing at their demand, and one of the members violated that rule, which was very upsetting because it suggested that they might violate other of our agreements. So we had to cease the hearing for a period of time until we could get assurances that no rules would be broken going forward, and we returned to answer questions repetitively, literally over and over again. I don't know how many times I had to say I did not know Jeffrey Epstein. I never went to his island. I never went to his homes. I never went to his offices. So it's on the record numerous times. It then got, at the end, quite unusual because I started being asked about UFOs and a series of questions about Pizzagate, one of the most vile, bogus conspiracy theories that was propagated on the internet, that was serving as the basis of a member's questions to me. So I can only say that the best exchange that I had came at the very end when, contrary to every other deposition they have taken, no Republican member asked any questions about Jeffrey Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell to anyone else they have deposed. And in fact, the Republican members didn't even show up for the deposition of Les Wexner. And when I said that, I had to point out that the only questions that any Republican member asked of any of the people they deposed was of former Attorney General Bill Barr when Chairman Comer asked him about the allegations, in his view, about Russia's involvement in my election in 2016. So at the very end of this hearing, after I made that point, I want to commend Chairman Comer for raising a series of significant questions that I responded to about the nature of the investigation and the areas that I thought should be explored. So I appreciated that. I want to see the truth come out. So that was a reassuring way to end a very long, repetitive deposition.
Madam,
So a really memorable moment there in Chappaqua, New York. You saw the former First Lady, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton come out after hours of deposition, hours of questioning from the House Oversight Committee, from Republicans and Democrats. You saw it there, come out of the building, this art center where this questioning is happening. It's going to be her husband's turn, the former president, tomorrow. And the former First Lady there going through a number of things, repeatedly talking about how repetitive these interviews were. She said, I don't know how many times I had to say that I did not know Jeffrey Epstein. She said she made that very clear to the committee. She seemed to be frustrated with some of the questions that she got that were, as she said, off topic, about UFOs, for example. She mentioned about the conspiracy theory of Pizzagate. She did commend the chairman, the Republican chairman of the Oversight Committee, for at the end there coming back. This isn't live, by the way. We're just in the screen re-rolling sort of what she said video-wise, just so you know we're not missing anything. She talked about how she commended Chairman Comer there for coming back to some what she described as relevant questions toward the end. But all of it, you heard the Sky News reporter there at the end ask about this invitation. Apparently, Ghislaine Maxwell at the wedding of Chelsea Clinton, and you heard the secretary there talk about how she was a +1, apparently, of somebody who was invited. As we get to the top of the hour here on NBC News Now, I want to bring back our chief Capitol Hill correspondent, Ryan Nobles, who has been covering this from the jump. A dramatic day of depositions, apparently, just given the fact that it is the former First Lady, the former Secretary of State, that was being questioned by Congress in this manner by the Oversight Committee. And Ryan, she again said there she wished it had been public. She would rather have done this publicly in front of everybody. That was the Clintons' desire. This happened behind closed doors, and just fascinating to see her come out there and take some questions from reporters.
Yeah, it's fascinating on a number of levels, Hallie, when you take into account that this is not something that Hillary Clinton does on a regular basis. You'd have to look back quite a ways to find a period of time where she just came out and took questions from a large gaggle of reporters in a fashion just like this. She clearly wanted to make a statement about the hours and hours that she spent inside of that room, and specifically make the point that she did not know Jeffrey Epstein, had a very casual relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell, and knew nothing of her crimes, and of their crimes, I should say. And she made the point that they asked a number of repetitive questions, the same questions over and over again during the period of time that she was in there. And then she also brought up at the end of the deposition that she was asked questions about UFOs and about the Pizzagate conspiracy theory that was floating around the end of her tenure in public life, and how ridiculous that was. And she pointed out what a terrible and awful conspiracy theory was that damaged a lot of people's lives. And so this was not something that we expected. It was interesting throughout the day. Her team never told us definitively that she wouldn't come out and talk to the cameras, but it was not something that we had planned to take place or to happen. So it was clear that she wanted to send a message about her experience inside that room, especially because Republicans had been given the opportunity to do that already. And she wanted to make sure, at least before this video comes out, that her interpretation of that experience. And then the other thing I should point out that was perhaps one of the biggest takeaways after the fact was she was asked, would she now be willing to sit for a public hearing, which is what she and her husband had initially agreed to. And she said she didn't need to do that, that she'd already answered all the questions. So we should not expect a public hearing from Hillary Clinton in the very near future.
Ryan, she also was asked about her husband, and obviously we're looking ahead now. I know you're staying in Chappaqua because former President Bill Clinton will be questioned by this committee tomorrow. Same location. The former secretary has suggested it may go even longer, but she was asked if she's confident that her husband did not know anything about Epstein's crimes, and she said she is confident about that, Ryan.
Yeah, she was fairly definitive in the answer to that question, Hallie. She did not equivocate on it. She explained her rationale behind why she thinks that there is no there, if you will. She talked about the chronology of her husband's interactions with Jeffrey Epstein, and she also pointed to the fact that there were a number of prominent people that knew and interacted with him before the 2008 indictment and an ultimate conviction, in which they all claimed to not have known much about his crimes. Now, Is that going to be enough for Republicans on this committee that are going to ask him very specific questions under oath tomorrow? I doubt it. But there's no doubt that Hillary Clinton is putting herself out there to a certain extent on her husband's behalf in stating very publicly that she does not believe that he had any sort of direct connection with Jeffrey Epstein in any sort of negative or nefarious way. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't value to Bill Clinton answering questions tomorrow. What committee Republicans told us was that there were a number of questions that Hillary Clinton answered during this deposition in which she deferred and said, my husband may know the answer to that question, but I don't know the answer to that question, particularly the financial structure of the Clinton Global Initiative, their fundraising efforts, any funds that may have flowed from Epstein and Maxwell as a result of that. So there's still going to be questions to ask even beyond, and Republicans have said this. They've never and have not accused Bill Clinton of any wrongdoing. That doesn't mean that there isn't the possibility that he could provide some level of connective tissue between some of the different investigative pursuits that are involved in this Epstein probe, Hallie.
Ryan, before I let you go, the precedent piece of this, you have the Democrats now suggesting that if you brought in now, the former Secretary of State, the former president tomorrow, that President Trump should be able to be brought in front of the committee too. And then I also, it's possible we could see video from this. Maybe, Ryan, if past is any precedent for the committee as of last week, we could see video of this tomorrow, maybe just in a matter of hours.
Yeah, that is a real possibility. The committee in the past has been able to turn these videos around in less than 24 hours. The Democrats on the committee are asking that. Hillary Clinton wants it to come out as soon as possible. Republicans have said that they will turn it around as quick as possible. So that is certainly a real possibility. What's interesting today, though, Hallie, Democrats continue to say that they believe that this sets the precedent for Donald Trump to be called forward. And James Comer, the chair of the committee, once again was pretty definitive in his belief that that Trump is not necessary to be a part of it. And then another Republican on the panel, Anna Paulina Luna of Florida, she brought up the argument that in the conversations that they've had with survivors, they have, as she described it, exonerated President Trump. Therefore, they don't need to talk to him. I don't know if the small group of survivors that they talk to, not to downplay their experience, which is very important, but they represent a pretty small percentage of the overall volume of people that were caught up in the Epstein scandal. I don't know if that's enough to disqualify or rule out President Trump as someone that could be a necessary cog in the wheel of trying to put together this investigative pursuit. But that is the explanation Republicans are giving, that and that Trump has answered a bunch of questions from reporters, none of which have been under oath. But what it demonstrates more than anything, Hallie, is that as long as Republicans are in charge of this committee, it's very unlikely President Trump is ever called to answer questions about Jeffrey Epstein.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.